My name is Marina Sarah, and I was 30 years old the morning I watched my sister try to steal my home on a high-definition security monitor. I was sitting at my kitchen island with a mug of Kona coffee, watching the live feed from the lobby of my Waikiki high-rise. Down on the marble floor, 200 guests in tropical formal wear were swarming the security desk. Caterers holding trays of white orchids argued with guards. And right in the center stood my younger sister Lana, wearing a custom beaded couture gown. She was hammering her fists against the bulletproof glass of my private elevator bank, with her mascara streaking down her cheeks. She was screaming at the camera lens, demanding access to the $12 million penthouse I paid for. I took a slow sip of coffee. Then I picked up my phone and pressed the button that would trigger a police response, sever her corporate sponsorships, and bankrupt her before the Honolulu sun reached its peak. Welcome back to Grape Echo Stories, where ordinary people stop screaming and start fighting back with cold, hard facts. If you believe that blood does not entitle anyone to steal your peace, drop your age in the comments and be sure to subscribe. To understand how a bride ended up in handcuffs on her wedding day, you have to go back exactly 72 hours. I work as the Chief Marine Conservation Architect for the Pacific Islands Ocean Foundation. My life is measured in coral reef sustainability metrics and ocean currents. That work pays well enough that I bought a sustainable penthouse overlooking the Pacific. I built a fortress defined by the strict safety regulations and personal boundaries of Hawaii coastal real estate. I prefer the silence of the deep ocean. Lana prefers the noise of a digital audience. She is an influencer who views the sacred beauty of this island merely as a backdrop for her brand. 3 days prior to the meltdown in the lobby, I was sitting on my lanai reviewing thermal mapping data. A notification fractured my focus. I rarely check social media, but my professional alerts flag any mention of my residential address for security purposes. A luxury champagne label had just posted a stylized digital invitation. The text read, "Lana and Trent, Sunset Nuptials, a sustainable luxury experience. Venue reveal, the Sarah Penthouse." Attached was a pristine drone shot of my exact building. The next image was a doctored floor plan of my home. The guest list boasted 200 influencers, reality stars, and brand executives. Lana had not just invited an army of strangers into my sanctuary, she had monetized my zip code. Most people would have called their sister. They would have yelled and demanded an explanation. I closed my laptop. Screaming implies a negotiation, and I do not negotiate with thieves. Lana had spent her life crossing lines and crying her way out of the consequences. This time, there would be no tears and no warning. My first question was not why she did it, but how she convinced a corporate sponsor she had the rights to my property. I opened my digital logs and started digging. A memory clicked into place. For the last 3 months, my physical mailbox in the lobby had been curiously empty of my standard Homeowners Association newsletters. I had brushed it off as an administrative error. Now I saw it for what it was, a felony. I accessed the building digital mail tracking system. The cameras caught Lana sneaking in behind other residents, intercepting my mail. She needed those documents to forge utility bills in her own name. She used that stolen mail to draft a fake residential lease agreement showing the corporate sponsors she was legally renting the penthouse from me. She was not just an entitled bride. She had committed wire fraud and mail theft. The sheer audacity of the paper trail left me breathless, not with panic, but with a cold, terrifying focus. I did not call the police, yet. A premature confrontation would only give her time to spin a lie to her followers. I needed to let her walk all the way to the edge of the cliff. I picked up my phone and called Koa, the head of building security. He is a man who takes the privacy of our residents as a personal code of honor. I sent him the forged lease and my authentic deed. We initiated a code black protocol. This meant every single access fob associated with my floor was digitally neutralized. We upgraded the biometric lockdown system I had installed to protect my foundation data. The trap was set, but the pressure was only just beginning. Before I could log out of the security portal, My cell phone rang. The screen displayed my mother, Diane. She did not ask if I knew about the wedding. She launched into a frantic list of demands, telling me that floral delivery trucks would arrive at dawn and the custom ice sculpture required the freight elevator. She expected me to step aside and let them turn my home into a circus. I told her the event was canceled. She scoffed and called me a bitter, jealous spinster, trying to ruin the one special day her golden child deserved. When Diane demanded I just let Lana have this one thing, a memory hit me like a physical blow. I was 16, holding an acceptance letter for a $5,000 marine biology scholarship. When I went to pay the tuition, the account was empty. Diane had secretly drained it to buy Lana a custom pageant gown. She had looked me in the eye and said, "Lana, beauty is an investment, and your fish can wait." That moment crystallized everything happening right now. This was not a sudden lapse in judgment. This was a lifetime of financial parasitism. Diane and Lana had always viewed my achievements merely as resources to be mined for their own vanity. I realized that screaming did not find the stolen money then, and it would not stop them now. I kept my voice perfectly flat. I told Diane I had to get back to work and ended the call. I did not just want to stop a wedding. I wanted to sever this toxic bloodline forever. To set the ultimate trap, I needed them to feel invincible. I needed a decoy. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother. When she answered, I did not mention the stolen mail or the forged lease. I forced my voice to sound flat and exhausted, projecting the tone of a woman overwhelmed by professional obligations. I told Diane that the Ocean Foundation had just issued an emergency mandate. A critical thermal wave had been detected near a remote atoll, threatening our most vulnerable coral nurseries. I explained that I was being deployed on a deep-sea data collection expedition, boarding a research vessel in 2 hours. I layered the lie with technical jargon, knowing she would tune it out and focus only on the core message. I would have 0 cell service for the next week. I told her I could not stop the wedding if I was not on the island. I added a final touch of fake defeat, asking her to please ensure the caterers did not scratch the hardwood floors during their setup. Diane let out a soft sigh. It was a practiced sound meant to convey maternal sympathy, but I could hear the sharp edge of triumph vibrating underneath it. She told me not to worry about a single thing and promised they would take perfect care of my home while I was at sea. She hung up the phone, believing she had won a total victory. She thought I was fleeing the conflict, giving her and Lana a free pass to occupy my property. By removing myself from the equation, I removed their primary obstacle. They felt invincible. With the villains believing the penthouse would be empty and undefended, they would move forward, finalizing their vendor contracts and paying their non-refundable deposits. While my mother celebrated her imaginary win, I walked over to my private elevator and rode it down to the lobby. I needed to meet with Koa. Koa is a former state investigator who spent 15 years tracking financial fraud before transitioning to private security. He now runs the matrix for our residential tower. He possesses a sharp analytical mind, a zero-tolerance policy for unauthorized access, and a deep respect for the sanctity of a person's home. I found him behind the polished mahogany security desk, reviewing the morning surveillance logs. I slid a manila folder across the marble counter. Inside was a printed copy of the fake residential lease Lana had created, alongside my authentic property deed and my sworn affidavit stating I had not authorized any event for the coming weekend. Koa read the documents in silence. His jaw tightened as he examined the forged signature on the bottom line of the lease. He looked up and asked how I wanted to proceed. I told him we were initiating a strict perimeter seal. We bypassed the standard electronic fobs and activated the secondary biometric lockdown protocol for my floor. I had originally installed this fingerprint and retinal scanning system to protect sensitive foundation data from corporate espionage. Now it would serve as an impenetrable wall against a bridal party. I gave Koa rigid orders: no vendors, no guests, no family members. Anyone attempting to access the penthouse without my physical presence was to be considered a hostile trespasser and treated accordingly. I returned to my quiet living room and opened my laptop. The physical perimeter was secure, but I needed to understand the exact terms of the financial transaction Lana had executed. I traced the luxury champagne brand mentioned in her digital invitation. Through my charity gala network, I reached out to a public relations associate who handles corporate sponsorships for high-profile events in Honolulu. I framed my inquiry as a standard due diligence check for a potential foundation partnership. Within an hour, the associate sent me a digital copy of the sponsorship agreement Lana had signed. Reading through the clauses, my blood turned to ice. Lana had not just forged a venue rental agreement, she had sold my professional credibility. Section 4 of the contract explicitly licensed the rights to use the Pacific Islands Ocean Foundation logo on the Champagne brand promotional materials. Lana had pitched her wedding as a sustainability partnership. She claimed the event would feature zero-waste initiatives curated by her sister, the chief marine conservation architect. She had promised the brand executives that their product would be photographed alongside my foundation branding, creating a halo of environmental responsibility for their luxury goods. My foundation operates on strict ethical guidelines, dedicating resources to restoring fragile marine ecosystems. We do not endorse alcohol brands, and we certainly do not sponsor influencer weddings. This discovery escalated the situation from a mere residential dispute to corporate identity theft. The $150,000 advance Lana received was not for her follower count. It was a direct purchase of the legitimacy and prestige I had spent a decade building. If those corporate logos appeared next to her superficial influencer circus, it would jeopardize millions of dollars in federal grants my foundation relied upon. My anger was no longer personal. It was clinical. I was dealing with a saboteur who was willing to destroy my life work for a single day of internet attention. I immediately forwarded the forged corporate documents to my real estate and corporate attorneys. My lead counsel called me within 5 minutes of receiving the file. He offered to draft an emergency injunction to halt the wedding before it even began. I declined the offer. An injunction would stop the event, but it would not punish the intent. If I stopped her now, she would play the victim, claiming it was a simple misunderstanding. I wanted her trapped in a breach of contract with a multinational corporation. I wanted the financial liability to fall squarely on her shoulders when the event failed to materialize. I instructed him to draft a lethal cease and desist order, targeting both Lana and the corporate sponsors. However, I placed a strict embargo on the delivery. We would not serve the documents until the morning of the wedding. We needed the vendors to arrive. We needed the sponsors to show up. We needed the breach of contract penalty clauses to activate fully. The sun began to set over the Pacific, casting long shadows across my living room. It was the evening before the event. I sat comfortably on my lanai, listening to the rhythm of the waves crashing against the Waikiki shoreline. I opened a fresh tab on my browser and navigated to the social media page my sister maintained. She was broadcasting live from a luxury hotel suite a few miles down the coast. The dramatic irony was exquisite. She sat on a plush sofa wearing a silk robe, dabbing at the corners of her eyes with a tissue. Lana looked directly into her phone camera and delivered a masterful performance to her 2 million followers. She cried crocodile tears, claiming her jealous sister had abandoned her on the eve of her wedding. She told her audience that I was stranded on a research boat in the middle of the ocean, unreachable and unhelpful. Her fiancé, Trent, walked into the frame holding a glass of champagne. He is a moderately successful architect who looked perfectly oblivious to the fraud he was stepping into. He kissed her cheek and told the audience how proud he was of his future wife. Lana bravely declared that the venue had lost her reservation, but she was working miracles to save the day for her guests. Her followers flooded the chat with messages of support, praising her resilience and condemning my supposed cruelty. I watched her dig her own grave in real time. She truly believed I was hundreds of miles away, tossing in the ocean swells. She had no idea I was sitting 20 floors directly above the very lobby she planned to invade the next morning. She did not know that the security team was already briefed, the biometric scanners were armed, and the legal documents were drafted. I closed the laptop and walked into my kitchen to make a fresh pot of coffee. The illusion was flawless. Tomorrow morning, her fabricated reality would collide with a concrete wall of legal and physical barriers. I went to sleep early, knowing the impact would be permanent. Dawn broke over Waikiki with a pale pink light that reflected off the Pacific Ocean. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my living room, holding a warm mug of coffee. The penthouse was perfectly silent. I had designed this space to mimic the calm of the deep sea. The acoustic paneling absorbed the ambient noise of the city below, leaving only the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I walked over to the kitchen island and tapped the smart screen to wake up the security monitors. The digital clock in the corner of the display read 6 in the morning. The execution of consequences was scheduled to begin. Down in the ground floor lobby, the high-definition cameras captured the first wave of the invasion. A white commercial van pulled onto the circular driveway. The side doors slid open, and 3 men stepped out carrying tall glass vases and bundles of rare white orchids. They walked toward the revolving doors with the confident stride of vendors who expected an empty freight elevator and a warm welcome. Instead, they met Koa. My head of security stood in the center of the marble foyer, dressed in his tailored dark suit. He crossed his arms and shook his head. Even without audio, I could see the exact moment the lead florist realized his lucrative morning contract was evaporating. Koa pointed toward the street, instructing them to leave the premises. Before the florist could even turn around, my cell phone vibrated on the marble countertop. The screen displayed my mother, Diane. She was calling early, assuming I was sitting on a dock somewhere waiting to board my research vessel. I swiped the screen and answered without a greeting. Diane spoke with a breathless, frantic energy. She tried to sound like a woman simply managing a minor logistical hiccup. She told me the floral delivery had arrived early and the front desk was being stubborn. She asked me to make a quick call to the security guard and grant them access just for a few hours. She promised she would lock up behind them and ensure my pristine hardwood floors remained untouched. I kept my eyes on the security feed. The florists were pulling out their clipboards and pointing at the building directory. I told Diane the doors would remain locked. I reminded her the event was canceled, and I advised her to tell the rest of her vendors to turn their trucks around. The silence on the other end of the line lasted for 3 seconds. When Diane spoke again, the sweet maternal cadence had vanished. Her voice turned brittle and sharp. She dropped the facade of the helpless mother and stepped into the role she preferred, the enforcer of the family hierarchy. She did not ask for permission anymore. She demanded I let Lana have this one special day. She told me I had a beautiful home that sat empty half the year while I chased fish around the ocean. She said it was selfish to hoard such a magnificent space when her golden child needed a venue to celebrate her love. When I remained silent, Diane reached for her favorite weapon. She called me a bitter, jealous spinster. She accused me of trying to sabotage my younger sister out of pure spite because I lacked a glamorous life of my own. She said I was punishing Lana for being beautiful and beloved. Standing in my quiet kitchen listening to her toxic logic, a memory hit me like a physical blow. I closed my eyes and I was 16 years old again. I was standing in the driveway of our old house holding a crisp white envelope from the National Marine Institute. The letter inside was an acceptance notification for a prestigious summer biology program, along with a $5,000 grant. I had spent 2 years working after school at a local aquarium to save the remaining tuition funds. I remembered riding my bicycle to the bank to request a cashier check. The teller had looked at her computer screen with a sympathetic grimace and informed me the savings account was empty. The balance was 0. I remembered running home with my chest burning. I burst into my sister's bedroom. Lana was 14, standing on a pedestal in the center of the room. Diane was pinning the hem of a custom, crystal-beaded pageant gown. The dress caught the afternoon light, scattering tiny rainbows across the walls. It looked expensive. It looked exactly like $5,000. I stood in the doorway, clutching my acceptance letter, and asked where my money went. Diane did not even look up from the hemline. She smoothed the silk fabric and told me Lana had the state finals in 3 weeks. She looked me in the eye and delivered the line that defined our dynamic forever. Lana Beauty is an investment. Your fish can wait. That flashback crystallized everything happening right now. The attempted theft of my $12 million penthouse was not a sudden lapse in judgment. It was the culmination of a lifetime of financial parasitism. Diane and Lana had always viewed my achievements merely as resources to be mined for their own vanity. My grades, my savings, my career, and now my home. None of it belonged to me in their eyes. I was simply the bank that funded their delusions of grandeur. Screaming did not find the stolen money when I was 16. Crying did not get me to the Marine Institute. I opened my eyes and looked at the security monitor. The florists were retreating to their van. I realized that arguing with Diane was a waste of breath. You cannot reason with a parasite. You can only cut off its food supply. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my choices or justify my boundaries. I spoke with the cold detachment of a scientist observing a failed experiment. I told Diane the perimeter was sealed and anyone attempting to breach it would be arrested for trespassing. I told her I had to get back to work. I ended the call and blocked her number through my carrier. I placed the phone face down on the counter. I was no longer just trying to stop a wedding. I was executing a permanent severance of this toxic bloodline. They would never extract another ounce of energy, wealth, or stability from my life. I poured myself another cup of coffee and watched the screens. The florist van drove away, leaving the circular driveway empty again. The initial skirmish was over, but the war was about to escalate. My tablet chirped with a priority alert from my digital monitoring software. The program tracks specific keywords related to my name and my property coordinates. I opened the application and saw a new video posted by Lana just 2 minutes ago. She had realized the vendors were being turned away. Instead of accepting defeat, she decided to weaponize her audience. She sat in the back of a luxury town car, holding her phone at a high angle. She told her 2 million followers that a cruel misunderstanding was threatening to ruin her dream wedding. Then she did the unthinkable. She tagged the exact street address of my residential tower. She issued a direct call to action, asking her local fans to show up in person to form a flash mob of love and support. She wanted to overwhelm the building security with sheer numbers and force her way inside. The conflict had just mutated. It was no longer a private family dispute over a venue. It was a targeted public security crisis, and the mob was already on the way. I stared at the digital alert flashing on my tablet screen. Lana, calling for a flash mob of influencers and fans to storm my building, was a desperate and unpredictable tactic. A crowd of untrained civilians creating a spectacle in the streets of Honolulu would be pure chaos. I do not operate in chaos. My career as a chief marine conservation architect requires precision planning and controlled environments. I design artificial reefs that must withstand ocean currents and tropical storms. I construct systems meant to endure. If her followers flooded the property, the Honolulu police would disperse them quickly, but the corporate sponsors might get spooked. A public riot could cause the luxury champagne brand and the bridal couture line to pull out of the event prematurely. I needed those corporate entities to stay. I needed the breach of contract penalty clauses to mature fully. The only way to ensure the trap snapped shut with lethal financial precision was to give my sister a false sense of security. I picked up my phone and accessed my carrier settings. I unblocked my mother number. I had to feed them a narrative they desperately wanted to hear. To set the ultimate trap, I needed them to feel invincible. I dialed Diane. She answered on the first ring, her breath catching in her throat. She was bracing for another argument, expecting me to yell about the social media posts. Instead, I let my shoulders drop and forced a heavy sigh into the receiver. I executed a flawless red herring. I modulated my tone to sound exhausted, defeated, and overwhelmed by my professional burdens. I told her the Pacific Islands Ocean Foundation had just escalated the coral bleaching event near a remote atoll to a Category 5 crisis. I explained that I was being deployed on an emergency week-long deep-sea data collection expedition. I spun a highly detailed fiction about boarding a specialized research vessel departing from Pearl Harbor in less than an hour. This lie was effective because it perfectly aligned with my established behavior. For the past decade, I have routinely vanished onto research ships for weeks at a time. Diane knew my career demanded sudden deployments. I emphasized that once we cleared the harbor, I would have zero cell service and no satellite internet access for the duration of the trip. I paused, letting the silence stretch over the phone line before delivering the final strike. I told her I did not have the energy to fight her anymore. I said, "Do whatever you want, just do not break anything." The shift in Diane was instantaneous. Her voice brightened, shedding the brittle defensive edge of our previous confrontation. She practically hummed with arrogant victory. She instantly adopted the persona of a gracious and forgiving matriarch, now that she had won the territory. She praised my dedication to marine biology, referring to my life work as a cute little fish project. She assured me the Penthouse would be treated like a museum and promised to send me photos I could look at when I returned to land. She hung up the phone, having swallowed the bait, without a single second of hesitation. By feigning surrender, I transformed their greatest obstacle into an open door. The results of my deception materialized online within 10 minutes. Lana posted a tearful but joyful update to her followers. She announced that the venue misunderstanding was resolved and the dream location was officially secured. She specifically instructed her fans to stand down and cancel the flash mob. The chaotic variable was eliminated. With the villains believing the Penthouse was empty and undefended, they moved forward with reckless arrogance. Through my digital monitoring software, I tracked the public confirmation posts from her event planners. The caterers, the lighting technicians, and the luxury champagne brand all verified their final preparations. Lana and Diane were finalizing their vendor contracts and authorizing the remaining non-refundable sponsor payouts. They were willingly binding themselves to hundreds of thousands of dollars in financial liability. They thought they were preparing for a glamorous celebration. They were actually signing their own financial death warrants. While they planned their custom cocktail menus, I took the private elevator down to the lobby. The marble floors gleamed under the recessed lighting of the high-rise. I walked past the concierge desk and entered the Restricted Security Operations Center to meet Koa. He was standing in front of a wall of surveillance screens, tracking the perimeter of the property. I handed him a thick manila envelope. Inside was the forged residential lease Lana had manufactured, along with my authentic, certified property deed. Koa inspected the forged signature, his jaw tightening in disgust. We did not just review standard lockout procedures. We initiated a total architectural quarantine. My residence is equipped with a military-grade biometric lockdown protocol. I originally installed this high-tech scanner to protect proprietary foundation data regarding offshore conservation zones. Corporate espionage is a real threat in the environmental sector, and my home needed to be as secure as a vault. The system requires dual authentication, combining a retinal scan with a specific thermal fingerprint signature. We primed the scanners and recalibrated the access parameters. I gave Koa strict, uncompromising orders. There would be no exceptions for vendors, guests, or family members claiming they had permission. If a fingerprint did not match mine, the steel-reinforced elevator doors would remain sealed shut. The service elevators were digitally severed from my floor, meaning no catering staff could bypass the main lobby. The stairwell access doors were magnetically locked and alarmed. I authorized Koa to use whatever legal means necessary to repel unauthorized entries. The fortress was sealed, and the trap was perfectly set. Koa nodded, his expression grim and entirely professional. He understood the assignment. He promised me that no one would breach the 18th floor. I rode the elevator back up to my silent sanctuary, feeling the faint hum of the reinforced security grid engaging around me. The physical boundaries of my life were secure. I walked into my kitchen and opened my laptop to review the final vendor list Lana had posted on her digital invitation. I wanted to know exactly which companies were about to lose their investments. But as I cross-referenced the corporate logos against the event sponsors, something caught my eye. I noticed a small digital watermark on the bottom corner of the luxury champagne brand promotional graphic. I zoomed in on the pixelated image, and my pulse slowed to a cold, steady rhythm. The deception went far deeper than a stolen venue. Lana had not just forged a lease agreement for a physical space. She had touched something far more dangerous than my real estate. The emblem printed next to the champagne bottles was not a generic graphic. It was a registered trademark. The watermark on the digital graphic demanded immediate investigation. I leaned closer to the monitor, analyzing the pixel structure of the emblem. It was the stylized wave and coral crest of the Pacific Islands Ocean Foundation, my employer, the organization I had dedicated my entire adult life to building. I opened a secure encrypted communication channel and contacted a former colleague who now managed public relations for high-net-worth brands in Honolulu. I needed the underlying paperwork that authorized the use of that crest. I framed my request as a routine compliance check, citing standard trademark verification procedures. She sent over a heavily redacted document within 20 minutes. I ran the file through a digital decryption tool I normally use for analyzing complex oceanographic data packets. The black boxes vanished, revealing the unredacted text of a $150,000 corporate agreement. Reading the clauses felt like walking into a freezing ocean current. The document outlined a comprehensive brand integration strategy. Lana had not simply rented a physical location for her reception. She had structured the entire event as a sanctioned sustainability partnership with my scientific institute. Section 7 of the agreement explicitly granted the luxury champagne company the right to print our trademarked wave crest on their promotional materials, press releases, and event signage. In exchange for the six-figure payout, my sister promised the executives that their product would be heavily featured alongside zero-waste initiatives curated by the chief marine conservation architect, me. She sold them my title. I scrutinized the final page. There at the bottom sat my forged signature, authorizing the partnership on behalf of the Foundation Board of Directors. A cold, clinical anger replaced the initial shock. This was no longer a domestic dispute over residential real estate. This was felony corporate identity theft. The stakes had just multiplied exponentially. Our grants fund the cultivation of resilient coral fragments that can survive rising sea temperatures. It is painstaking labor, requiring years of data collection and peer-reviewed research. My team works in remote environments, facing harsh elements, to secure the future of the oceans. We operate on a strict code of ethics because our funding relies entirely on untarnished public trust. To see that trust commodified to sell bottles of overpriced sparkling wine at a superficial influencer party made me sick. Lana was treating my life work like a cheap prop. If this wedding proceeded, my foundation reputation would be dragged through the mud of a cheap circus. Lana intended to use my hard-earned credibility to validate her shallow lifestyle. The corporate sponsor believed they were buying a halo of environmental responsibility. They thought the payout was an investment in a legitimate ecological partnership. Instead, they were funding a fraudulent vanity project orchestrated by a woman whose only actual relationship with the ocean involved posing on a yacht in a designer swimsuit. I saved the unredacted contract to an offline encrypted drive. I needed to assemble a legal strike team. I picked up my phone and conferenced in my personal real estate attorney and the lead corporate counsel for the Ocean Foundation. I presented the forged residential lease and the fraudulent brand integration agreement. The silence on the line was profound as two seasoned litigators digested the sheer scale of the liability Lana had engineered. They understood instantly that we were dealing with multiple overlapping felonies, including wire fraud, mail theft, and trademark infringement. The Foundation Counsel immediately offered to dispatch a federal injunction to the Champagne Company headquarters. A swift legal notice would halt the funding and shut down the event before a single guest boarded a plane. I vetoed the suggestion. I explained my strategy to the legal team. If we issued a warning now, Lana would spin the narrative. She would cry to her followers claiming an administrative error or a misunderstanding had occurred. She would play the victim and escape the true weight of her actions. I did not want a messy public relations battle. I wanted a definitive execution of justice. I instructed both attorneys to draft a joint cease and desist order so lethal it would effectively vaporize her online brand. The document needed to itemize every forged signature, every stolen trademark, and every breached residential code. It would demand the immediate return of the $150,000 advance, plus punitive damages for trademark infringement. However, I placed a strict embargo on the delivery of this document. We would hold the legal hammer in reserve. The papers would only be served when the vendors were physically stranded outside my building and the sponsors were standing in the lobby demanding answers. We spent the next 3 hours refining the legal language. We ensured the liability fell squarely on Lana, shielding the foundation and my property from any potential countersuits by the angry beverage executives. My attorneys marveled at the meticulous nature of my documentation. I told them my job requires mapping the slow decay of coral reefs over decades. I know how to track a deteriorating situation, and I know exactly when to intervene to prevent a total collapse. In this case, the ecosystem I was protecting was my own life. By the time the legal conference concluded, the sun had fully set over Waikiki. The city lights began to reflect off the dark surface of the ocean. My phone remained silent. Diane and Lana were likely celebrating their impending triumph, enjoying a lavish rehearsal dinner funded by stolen credibility. They were drinking expensive wine, believing they had outsmarted me. Their arrogance was their greatest vulnerability. They operated on the assumption that rules did not apply to them because they had never been forced to pay the invoice for their transgressions. Trent is an architect who specializes in mid-century modern restorations. He comes from a respectable family with quiet wealth. From what little I gathered during forced holiday dinners, he prides himself on integrity and precision. He genuinely believed Lana was a successful digital entrepreneur. He thought she had negotiated a brilliant venue deal through familial goodwill. He had no idea his future wife was a grifter, constructing their entire union on a foundation of felony fraud. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the street level. Everything appeared normal. But beneath the surface, a catastrophic pressure was building. I had armed the biometric scanners. I had secured the legal documents. I had established the deep-sea decoy. Every piece of the trap was locked into place. The financial ruin they had constructed was a towering house of cards, and they were insisting on standing right underneath it. I turned away from the window and went to my bedroom to rest. Tomorrow the sun would rise, and the illusion would finally shatter. But as I closed my eyes, a new variable entered my mind. I knew how the sponsors and the vendors would react when the doors refused to open. I knew how Diane would panic. Yet I had not fully calculated the response of the man who thought he was walking into a legitimate marriage. If Trent discovered the truth on his wedding day, his reaction would not be a calculated retreat. It would be a visceral explosion of betrayal that would escalate the crisis in a way none of us could predict. The day before the wedding arrived with a brilliant blue sky stretching across the Oahu coastline. Inside my $12 million penthouse, the environment remained perfectly regulated and profoundly quiet. I sat at my drafting table, unrolling a series of wide architectural blueprints. I spent the morning drafting coral reef restoration charts for the Ocean Foundation. The work requires meticulous precision. We map the ocean floor, calculating the optimal depth and current flow needed to anchor artificial limestone structures. These structures provide a stable foundation for fragile coral polyps to attach, grow, and eventually regenerate a dying ecosystem. Real growth takes years of patience and an unshakable foundation. My sister preferred instant validation built on shifting sand. I finished shading a thermal temperature gradient on the map and set down my drafting pencil. I picked up my tablet to check the perimeter security logs and the digital monitoring software. The program flagged a live video broadcast initiated by Lana just moments ago. I tapped the screen and watched the stream load. The dramatic irony of the broadcast was exquisite. Lana was sitting on the edge of a plush, king-sized bed inside a luxury hotel suite a few miles down the coast. The staging of the shot was carefully calculated. Soft, natural light filtered through sheer curtains, illuminating her face, while a row of expensive garment bags hung in the background. She stared into the lens of her smartphone and delivered a masterclass in manipulation to her 2 million followers. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing a single tear to trace a path down her cheek. She took a trembling breath and addressed her audience with a trembling voice. She claimed that a catastrophic emergency had nearly ruined her dream wedding. She told her fans that her jealous older sister had been deployed on a sudden research expedition. She spun a tragic tale, painting me as an incompetent and bitter woman who had supposedly forgotten to finalize the venue reservation before vanishing into the Pacific Ocean. Lana looked directly into the camera and lied with breathtaking ease. She said I was stranded on a boat hundreds of miles away, unreachable by phone or email. She claimed I had left her stranded with 200 guests arriving and nowhere to host them. But then she shifted her posture, sitting up straighter to project strength. She bravely declared that she was working miracles to save the day. She told her audience that she had utilized her industry connections and her sheer willpower to secure the space anyway, bypassing my supposed incompetence. She presented herself as a resilient hero, overcoming the malicious sabotage of a jealous sibling. I watched the chat window on the side of the screen scroll at a blinding speed. Thousands of comments poured in every second. Her followers praised her grace and her strength. They flooded the chat with heart emojis and angry messages directed at my name. They called me selfish, toxic, and cruel. They validated her lies without a single shred of evidence, forming an echo chamber of blind devotion. Lana fed off that digital energy. Her parasocial relationship with her audience was the only thing that mattered to her. She cared more about the perception of her life than the actual reality she was living. Through the doorway of the hotel suite on the video feed, I caught a brief glimpse of Trent. He was pacing in the background, holding a clipboard and talking on his phone. Trent is an architect who specializes in restoring mid-century modern homes. His entire profession revolves around structural integrity and authentic materials. He values blueprints, load-bearing walls, and honest craftsmanship. It was a tragic irony that he had chosen to build his future with a woman who fabricated every aspect of her existence. He genuinely believed Lana had worked a miracle to save their venue. He had no idea she had forged a lease, stolen my mail, and committed corporate identity theft to secure the location. He was designing a life with a ghost. I carried my tablet out to the lanai and sat in a woven lounge chair. The gentle Hawaiian breeze carried the faint scent of saltwater and blooming plumeria. I looked out over the endless expanse of the ocean. The contrast between my physical reality and her digital fiction was staggering. She truly believed I was tossing on the open water, entirely disconnected from the world. She had no idea I was sitting 20 floors directly above the very marble lobby she planned to invade. She did not know I was watching her every move, holding the detonator to her entire fake life. I set the tablet on the glass patio table and walked back into the kitchen. I ground fresh Kona coffee beans and brewed a dark, rich pot. The aroma filled the room, grounding me in the present moment. I poured a mug and carried it into my home office where I kept the physical copies of the legal dossier. I unlocked the fireproof filing cabinet and extracted the thick manila folder my attorneys had prepared the night before. I spread the documents across my desk, reviewing the trap one last time. The paperwork was flawless. The forged residential lease sat next to the fraudulent corporate sponsorship agreement. The unredacted clauses exposing the theft of the Pacific Islands Ocean Foundation trademark stared back at me in stark black and white. Beneath those contracts lay the lethal cease and desist order drafted by my legal counsel. The document detailed every single felony Lana had committed, itemizing the financial penalties she would face when the breach of contract clauses activated. I traced my finger over the official seals and the notarized stamps. These were not fleeting digital pixels or easily deleted comments. These were binding legal instruments, possessing the power to freeze bank accounts and initiate criminal proceedings. I closed the folder and locked it back inside the cabinet. The snare was primed and the mechanisms were oiled. There was nothing left to do but wait for the prey to step onto the pressure plate. I spent the rest of the afternoon reading a novel on the lanai, ignoring the constant alerts from the monitoring software. I did not need to see the final vendor confirmations or the rehearsal dinner photos. The outcome was already written in stone. As evening fell, the Honolulu skyline illuminated, casting a warm glow over the city. I ate a quiet dinner and prepared for bed. The silence of the penthouse felt heavier than usual, charged with the anticipation of the coming dawn. Tomorrow morning, the fragile illusion Lana had constructed would violently collide with the concrete reality of my boundaries. The impact would be catastrophic for her brand, her finances, and her relationships. I set my alarm for 5 in the morning and went to sleep early, resting peacefully under the high-tech security grid of my fortress. When my eyes opened the next morning, the sky was still dark. I brewed another pot of coffee and turned on the security monitors. The digital clock on the terminal glowed in the dim light. The time had arrived. I sat at the kitchen island watching the live feed of the circular driveway down below. A pair of headlights cut through the early morning fog, illuminating the polished brass handles of the lobby doors. The first white event rental van pulled up to the curb. The invasion had officially begun, and the first domino was about to fall. The morning sun crested over the Diamond Head crater, painting the Hawaiian sky in streaks of bruised purple and pale gold. Inside my kitchen, the air felt cool and filtered. I sat at the polished wood island, cradling a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. My eyes remained fixed on the array of security monitors mounted above the terminal. The digital timestamp in the lower corner of the screen rolled over to exactly 7 in the morning. The execution phase commenced precisely on schedule. Down on the street level, the quiet sanctuary of the residential driveway shattered. A fleet of white commercial box trucks turned off the main avenue and idled past the manicured palm trees. The heavy diesel engines rattled the tranquil morning air. Drivers in matching polo shirts hopped out of the cabs, carrying thick clipboards and heavy walkie-talkies. They unlatched the rear cargo doors and deployed steel loading ramps. The vendor invasion had officially arrived to claim their promised venue. I watched the high-definition feed as the logistics teams mobilized. These were not amateur event planners. Lana had hired premier Honolulu companies using my stolen credibility to secure their services. A catering crew rolled out towering insulated racks filled with raw ingredients and prepped appetizers. Another truck yielded dozens of lighting technicians hauling heavy aluminum rigging and coiled black cables. The most striking visual came from the botanical team. 5 assistants carefully unloaded tall glass vases overflowing with rare white orchids and imported peonies. The flowers looked fragile against the stark concrete of the loading zone. They represented thousands of dollars in perishable inventory currently baking in the rising tropical humidity. The workers formed a chaotic procession, marching through the automatic glass doors into the serene marble lobby of my building. This space was designed to evoke the quiet elegance of a luxury resort, offering residents an unbroken sense of peace from the moment they step inside. The sudden influx of rolling carts, shouting supervisors, and heavy equipment desecrated that curated silence. They headed straight for the private elevator banks, expecting immediate access to the 18th floor. Instead, they encountered Koa. My head of security stood in the center of the polished floor, flanked by 4 highly trained guards dressed in tailored dark suits. They formed a human barricade, positioned precisely in front of the brass elevator doors. Koa possessed the calm, immovable presence of a stone monolith. He had spent his previous career dealing with hostile witnesses and desperate suspects. A frustrated wedding planner held no power over him. The lead florist stepped forward, waving her clipboard like a shield. She wore a headset and spoke with the frantic energy of a woman racing against a tight production schedule. She gestured toward the elevator and pointed at a printed manifest demanding immediate entry to the Sarah Penthouse. She cited a delivery window that was rapidly closing. Koa did not raise his voice. He did not mirror her panic. He slowly reached into his suit jacket and produced his digital security tablet. He tapped the screen referencing the daily access logs. He looked the florist directly in the eye and delivered a cold, clinical rejection. He stated there is no event authorized for that residence and informed her she was trespassing on private property. Confusion rippled through the crowd of vendors. The catering supervisor pushed his way to the front, holding a copy of a signed contract. He argued that they had received a non-refundable deposit and possessed a legally binding lease agreement for the space. He threatened to call the police to enforce their right to enter. Koa remained unflappable. He reached behind the security desk and pulled out a stack of manila envelopes. He handed one to the catering supervisor and another to the florist. Inside each envelope was a photocopy of my certified property deed, alongside a formal trespass warning printed on the building official letterhead. Koa advised them that any fraudulent contracts they possessed were a matter for civil litigation between them and the signatory. He clarified that the signatory did not own the building. He gave them a 5-minute warning to clear the lobby before he initiated formal arrests. The realization of their predicament washed over the vendors in real time. The logistical squeeze had begun. The catering crew looked at their insulated racks, knowing the raw seafood would spoil if it remained in the warm lobby. The florist stared at the delicate white orchids, already beginning to wilt under the harsh, recessed lighting of the foyer. The financial clock ticked relentlessly for these small business owners. They had diverted all their weekend resources to this single mega event. If the reception failed to happen, they stood to lose their entire profit margin. Panic set in. The vendors pulled out their smartphones and began frantically dialing the event coordinator and the bride. I checked the secondary monitoring software on my tablet, which tracked my sister public digital footprint. Lana was currently streaming a live video from her hotel suite down the coast. She sat in a plush makeup chair wearing a silk robe while a professional stylist pinned up her hair. She held her phone at a flattering angle, curating a perfect bridal glow for her 2 million followers. She chatted happily about the upcoming sunset ceremony, entirely ignoring the incoming calls from her desperate vendors. Her vanity blinded her to the logistical collapse occurring 20 floors below my feet. She refused to answer the phone because a frantic conversation would ruin the aesthetic of her live stream. The tension in the lobby mounted, minute by minute. The lighting technicians began arguing with the caterers over floor space. The delivery drivers refused to load the equipment back into the trucks until they received clear answers. The serene marble foyer transformed into a hostile holding pen for stranded workers. I sat in my quiet kitchen, sipping my dark roast coffee and watching the beautiful chaos unfold on the screens. I did not have to speak a single word to enforce my boundaries. The architecture of the building and the rigid discipline of my security team did the heavy lifting for me. This was the consequence of building a life on borrowed prestige. Lana assumed that a forged document and a confident smile would act as a universal key to any door she wished to open. She underestimated the concrete reality of actual ownership. A piece of paper drawn up in a hotel room cannot bypass a biometric scanner. 1 million social media followers cannot override a trespassing mandate enforced by seasoned security professionals. As I watched the florist desperately spraying water onto her dying orchids, I felt a brief flicker of pity for the workers. They were innocent collateral damage in a scheme engineered by a narcissist. They were losing money and time because they trusted a woman who lied as easily as she breathed. I made a mental note to have my legal team reach out to the vendors next week to offer them a private settlement from my own accounts. I protect marine ecosystems from toxic runoff, and I could afford to protect these local businesses from the toxic fallout of my sister fraud. But today, they had to serve their purpose. They had to remain stranded. The pressure needed to reach a boiling point. The trap relied on a public spectacle. The vendors shouting at the security guards provided the perfect backdrop for the next phase of the execution. The stranded workers were just the foundation of the crisis. The real damage would occur when the people funding this disaster arrived expecting a glamorous return on their investment. Just as the catering supervisor began shouting about melting ice sculptures, a sleek black town car pulled into the circular driveway, stopping right behind the row of box trucks. The rear door opened, and two men in tailored linen suits stepped onto the pavement. I recognized them immediately from my industry research. They were the regional brand directors for the luxury champagne company. They represented the corporate sponsors who had wired $150,000 to a fraudulent bank account. They expected to walk into a serene rooftop oasis filled with zero-waste botanical arrangements and high-fashion influencers. Instead, they were walking into a loud, sweaty loading dock dispute. The squeeze was about to crack the foundation of the entire wedding, and the bride was still busy fixing her hair. The two regional brand directors pushed through the revolving glass doors of my building, expecting the pristine ambiance of a high-end venue. They anticipated chilled flutes of vintage Brut and the soft acoustic notes of a local string quartet. Instead, they walked into an atrium that smelled of wilting imported peonies and heated desperation. The caterers were still arguing loudly with the protective detail, while a lighting technician sat on a coiled black cable, looking defeated. The executives paused, adjusting their tailored linen jackets. They exchanged a glance of profound confusion. They had wired a six-figure sum to fund a seamless environmental showcase. This chaotic holding pen was a direct threat to their corporate equity. Soon after their arrival, a steady trickle of early VIP guests began to fill the foyer. Influencers wearing tropical silk dresses and sharp summer suits stood awkwardly near the entry. They held expensive gift bags and searched the perimeter for a reception desk that did not exist. The murmurs of confusion grew louder, creating a dull roar that echoed off the marble walls. A few of the guests pulled out their smartphones, confused by the delay, and started recording the bizarre scene. At exactly 9:15, a stretch white limousine pulled onto the circular driveway, blocking the catering trucks from leaving. The rear door swung open. A frantic production assistant scrambled out first, holding a ring light and a stabilizing gimbal. Then my sister emerged. Lana wore a custom beaded couture gown that weighed at least 20 pounds. The heavy silk tulle train dragged across the hot pavement, collecting dust and stray leaves. She marched toward the entrance, radiating a terrifying entitlement. Throughout her life, Lana operated on a simple, unwavering formula. If she created enough noise, the world would eventually bend to accommodate her desires. I watched her employ this tactic during our childhood. Whenever a teacher or a coach denied her a prize, she would stage a public meltdown, framing herself as a victim of profound injustice. Our mother always folded under the pressure of these performances, handing over whatever reward Lana demanded just to restore the peace. My sister assumed this residential barricade was merely another soft obstacle she could obliterate with a loud enough tantrum. She believed her tears were a universal currency that could purchase anything on earth. Lana burst through the glass doors. She expected the crowds to part. She anticipated a pathway cleared straight to the private elevators. Instead, she slammed into the reality of a dozen stranded workers and confused guests. She spotted Koa standing near the brass doors. She hoisted the heavy skirts of her gown and marched directly toward him. Her camera crew scrambled to keep pace, capturing every second of her grand entrance. She demanded he step aside and unlock the residential terminal immediately. She spoke with the sharp, clipped tone of someone who had never been told no by a person in a uniform. Koa did not flinch. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking down at her with a blank, stoic expression. He reiterated that the floor was sealed and she possessed no legal right to enter the premises. The flat denial fractured her carefully curated persona. Lana face-flushed a deep, angry crimson. Her carefully applied makeup began to sheen with sweat under the warm lobby lights. She snatched the smartphone from her production assistant and activated a live broadcast directly to her primary social feed. She thrust the lens mere inches from Koa's face. She pitched her voice into a shrill, piercing register, weaponizing her digital audience against a man simply doing his job. She shrieked that she was a legal tenant being unlawfully detained by abusive guards. She cried that her dream day was being held hostage by corporate thugs. She begged her followers to record the injustice and demand accountability. It was a spectacular performance of victimhood designed to trigger outrage. She thrust a printed copy of the forged residential lease toward his chest, screaming about her legal rights. She claimed she paid the rent and demanded immediate access to her own home. Koa had dealt with hardened criminals attempting to intimidate him during federal financial investigations. A crying influencer holding a smartphone did not even register on his stress scale. He did not raise a hand to block the camera lens. He did not raise his voice to match her hysteria. He remained a fortress of calm. He simply reached into his tailored jacket, produced a crisp white envelope, and extended it toward her trembling hands. He spoke in a clear, resonant baritone that carried over the ambient noise of the crowded atrium. He stated for the digital record that she was holding a formal trespass warning issued by the property management. He informed her that the Honolulu Police Department had already been dispatched to remove all unauthorized individuals from the private property. He advised her to instruct her guests to exit the building before the officers arrived with handcuffs. The words hung in the filtered air. The digital broadcast captured his statement perfectly. The illusion cracked live on the internet. Thousands of viewers tuning into the stream witnessed the ugly reality behind the filters. They heard the calm, undeniable authority of a security professional dismantling her fake narrative in a matter of seconds. I sat in my quiet kitchen sipping my coffee and watching the brand executives standing near the catering carts. Their expressions shifted from confusion to pure horror. They were watching their elegant sustainability partner throw an unhinged tantrum in a residential foyer. They saw her threaten working-class security professionals while wearing a dress that cost more than most people earn in a year. The optics were a nightmare. A luxury brand built on elegance and environmental responsibility was now publicly associated with a screaming trespasser waving fraudulent documents. The corporate directors stepped back, physically distancing themselves from the bride. One of the men pulled out his cell phone and began typing furiously, likely contacting their crisis management team. They realized they had purchased a ticket on a sinking ship. The foundation of Lana's social media empire was crumbling right in front of their eyes. Even the other influencers in the lobby stopped recording themselves and turned their cameras on Lana, capturing her humiliation from a dozen different angles. Her own ecosystem of superficial validation was turning against her. Lana lowered her phone, her mouth hanging open in shock. She stared at the trespass warning in her hand as if it were written in a foreign language. The camera crew slowly backed away, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The production assistant lowered the ring light, casting harsh shadows across Lana's flushed face. She was trapped in a nightmare of her own making, and the whole world was watching her drown in a shallow pool of her own lies. But the public humiliation in the lobby was only the beginning of the collapse. Her followers were typing questions she could not answer. Her sponsors were drafting emails to revoke their funding. The logistical failure of the morning was complete. Yet a far more devastating reckoning was approaching the building. While Lana stood frozen in front of the locked elevators, trying to process the concept of a consequence, the automatic doors slid open once again. The final guest arrived to witness the ruins of her deception. The faint wail of Honolulu police sirens drifted over the gentle crash of the Waikiki surf. I sat in my kitchen, monitoring the high-definition audio feed from the lobby. The approaching sirens signaled the end of the grace period Koa had offered. The stranded vendors heard the noise and began frantically rolling their insulated catering carts toward the exit. The corporate sponsors edged closer to the revolving glass doors, eager to escape the impending law enforcement response. The entire ecosystem of Lana Fabricated Wedding was collapsing. Right as the sirens grew louder, a pristine silver vintage convertible turned into the circular driveway. The car bypassed the retreating catering trucks and parked near the entrance. Trent stepped out. He wore a tailored ivory linen suit with a rare blue orchid pinned to his lapel. He carried the relaxed, confident posture of a groom arriving for the happiest day of his life. From forced holiday dinners, I knew Trent was a man who valued authenticity. As an architect specializing in restoring mid-century modern homes, he spent his days analyzing load-bearing walls and structural integrity. He detested cheap facades. He believed a beautiful house required a solid foundation to endure. He brought that same philosophy into his personal life. He believed Lana was a successful digital entrepreneur who had secured a generous gift from her older sister through familial goodwill. He had no idea his bride was a grifter who forged documents to steal residential property. Trent pushed through the glass doors expecting to find a serene champagne reception. He walked into a holding pen of hostility. He froze mid-step. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the bizarre tableau. He saw the wilted botanical arrangements baking under the recessed lighting. He noticed the regional brand directors standing in the corner, looking disgusted. He watched fellow influencers pointing their smartphone cameras not at a beautiful altar, but at his future wife. And then he saw Lana. She stood near the locked brass elevator bank, wearing her heavy, custom couture gown, clutching a formal trespass warning. Her makeup was streaked with running mascara. The cognitive dissonance paralyzed him. Trent looked at the barricade of security guards and demanded an explanation for the chaos. Lana recognized her last remaining lifeline. She dropped the trespass warning and rushed toward him. The heavy silk tulle of her dress dragged across the marble floor. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his lapel. She activated her tears, instantly weaponizing her distress. She knew the live broadcast was still running on her abandoned phone resting on a nearby luggage cart. She pitched her voice to Carrie, projecting a narrative of victimhood. She cried that I was having a severe mental breakdown. She told Trent that I was trapped in a cycle of bitter jealousy and had decided to ruin their love on a cruel whim. She begged him to intervene, pleading with him to talk some sense into the security guards, whom she branded as mindless corporate thugs. She expected Trent to adopt the role of the protective hero and fight the battle she had started. She wanted him to blind himself to the facts and trust her tears. Koa did not allow the manipulation to take root. He recognized the pattern of a con artist attempting to isolate her target. He stepped out from the security barricade and approached the couple. He did not issue a threat or raise his voice. He simply held out a crisp manila folder. Trent gently unwrapped Lana from his neck and accepted the file. He opened the cover. Koa informed the groom that he was looking at the authentic property deed for the penthouse, listing me as the sole legal owner. He then pointed to a secondary document containing my sworn legal affidavit, confirming I was physically present on the 18th floor and had never authorized a wedding on the premises. Finally, Koa revealed the centerpiece of the trap. He instructed Trent to examine the residential lease agreement Lana had provided to the vendors and the corporate sponsors. He highlighted the forged signature at the bottom of the page. Trent stared at the paperwork. The lobby fell into a tense silence, broken only by the wail of the approaching police cruisers outside. As an architect, Trent reviewed binding contracts and municipal permits on a daily basis. He possessed an acute eye for detail. He recognized the fraudulent nature of the documents immediately. He saw the mismatched signature lines and the stolen utility bill headers. He looked up from the folder and stared at Lana. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. The woman standing in front of him was a stranger. He grasped the terrifying scope of her deception. She had not simply exaggerated her influence or mishandled a booking. She had committed felony wire fraud and mail theft to fund a vanity project. She had sold the credibility of my Marine Conservation Foundation to purchase luxury champagne. She had built their entire union on a foundation of stolen property and lies. The panic in Lana's eyes intensified as she watched the protective warmth drain from Trent's face. She reached out to grab his hands, offering another desperate string of excuses. She told him it was a simple misunderstanding that could be fixed with a quick phone call. Trent stepped backward, putting a foot of physical distance between them. The disgust radiating from his posture was palpable. He did not scream or demand an apology. He realized that any words she spoke would be woven from the same fabric of deception. The humiliation of standing in a crowded lobby, surrounded by recording smartphones and angry vendors, washed over him. He unpinned the rare blue orchid from his ivory lapel. He let the boutonniere slip from his fingers, dropping it onto the cold marble floor. He turned his back on the bride and walked toward the revolving doors without saying a single word. Lana lunged forward, screaming his name. Her voice cracked, echoing off the high ceilings as she begged him to come back. Trent did not pause or look over his shoulder. He pushed through the glass doors and walked out into the humid Hawaiian morning, leaving the wedding behind. Right as he reached his vintage convertible, 2 Honolulu police cruisers pulled into the circular driveway with their light bars flashing blue and red. The officers stepped out of their vehicles, approaching the glass doors to answer the trespassing call. Lana watched her groom drive away while law enforcement closed in on her location. Her ultimate safety net had vanished. Her corporate sponsors were preparing to sue her into bankruptcy. But the spectacle was far from over. From the corner of my camera feed, I saw my mother Diane push her way to the front of the crowd. Seeing the police officers walking toward her golden child, Diane realized the legal arguments had failed. She knew she had to deploy her final toxic weapon to manipulate the authorities and shift the blame back to me. The Honolulu Police Department officers stepped through the revolving doors just as Trent taillights disappeared down the palm-lined avenue. 2 uniformed patrolmen assessed the chaotic scene. They identified the stranded catering crew, the murmuring influencers, and my sister sobbing in her ruined custom gown. They rested their hands on their duty belts, projecting immediate tactical authority. They bypassed the civilian crowd and walked directly toward COA to receive the formal trespassing complaint. My mother Diane observed this shift in the power dynamic. Diane possesses a predatory instinct for identifying vulnerability and exploiting it. When I was a child, she frequently utilized sudden phantom illnesses to derail any event that did not center around her desires. If my father tried to address her reckless credit card spending, she would clutch her temples and claim a debilitating migraine. She learned early that a medical emergency functions as the ultimate trump card in polite American society. It forces everyone to abandon logic and default to sympathy. Seeing the officers striding toward Lana, she knew the forged lease would not survive legal scrutiny. She needed to hijack the narrative before handcuffs appeared. Diane stepped into the center of the marble floor, deliberately positioning herself in the direct line of sight of the brand executives and the police. She brought a trembling hand to her chest, gripping the fabric of her dress. She let out a sharp, guttural wail that echoed off the high ceiling. Her knees buckled in a synchronized theatrical collapse. She fell back onto a plush velvet sofa, gasping for air and clutching her throat. The reaction in the room was instantaneous. The low murmuring ceased. A few of the VIP guests gasped and took a step back, dropping their expensive gift bags. The 2 patrolmen halted their advance toward Lana and pivoted toward the sofa. Standard law enforcement protocol dictates that preserving human life supersedes a civil trespassing dispute. Diane had effectively paralyzed the eviction process. Lana recognized the genius of her mother ploy immediately. My sister abandoned the mourning of her departed groom. She scooped up her smartphone from the luggage cart and aimed the high-definition camera directly at the sofa. She resumed her live broadcast, weaponizing the fake medical crisis for her digital audience. She knelt beside the velvet cushions, sobbing loudly. She shrieked that the stress of my cruel betrayal was causing a fatal heart attack. She looked directly into the lens and branded me a murderer. She painted a picture of a ruthless, wealthy older sister sitting safely in a penthouse while her loving mother died in the foyer below. It was a desperate, calculated play to win back the sympathy of the horrified corporate sponsors and manipulate the arriving police officers into viewing them as victims rather than perpetrators. Sitting in my quiet kitchen on the 18th floor, I watched the performance unfold on my security monitors. I did not feel a spike of adrenaline. I felt the cold, clinical clarity of a scientist observing a predictable biological reaction. I knew that if the police officers handled the situation alone, they would call for a standard ambulance transport. Diane would be gently wheeled out on a stretcher, escaping the humiliation of a trespassing arrest. She would spend the afternoon resting in a comfortable hospital bed, continuing her victim narrative and avoiding criminal charges. I refused to let her control the exit strategy. I picked up my phone and dialed emergency services myself. When the dispatcher answered, I did not sound frantic. I used precise medical terminology. I reported a suspected myocardial infarction occurring in the lobby of my residential tower. I specified the patient age and requested an advanced cardiac life support unit. Providing accurate, alarming details ensured a rapid, high-priority response from the city paramedics. I ended the call and took another sip of my Kona coffee. The trap was about to spring on a biological level. Less than 4 minutes later, the piercing wail of a new siren shattered the morning air. A heavy fire department rescue vehicle and an advanced ambulance jumped the curb of the circular driveway. 4 paramedics rushed through the glass doors, carrying heavy trauma bags, an oxygen tank, and a portable electrocardiogram monitor. They moved with the urgent, synchronized efficiency of medical professionals fighting the clock. The police officers cleared a wide path, pushing the lingering influencers aside. The lead paramedic, a stern woman with a weathered face, knelt beside the velvet sofa. She instructed Lana to step back and lower her phone. Lana tried to argue, claiming her followers needed to witness the tragedy, but a patrolman firmly shoved her out of the medical perimeter. The paramedics worked swiftly. They tore open Diane's silk blouse and attached the sticky electrode pads directly to her chest and ribs. They wrapped a blood pressure cuff around her arm and clipped a pulse oximeter to her index finger. Diane continued to moan and thrash gently, keeping her eyes squeezed shut. She played the role of a dying matriarch, demanding the undivided attention of every person in the room. The lead paramedic turned her attention to the digital screen of the portable monitor. The green line traced a steady, rhythmic pattern. The numbers glowing on the display revealed the objective truth. I zoomed in on the security feed to watch her reaction. The paramedic checked the blood pressure reading and then glanced at the oxygen saturation levels. She reached out and felt the pulse at Diane's wrist. The urgent energy drained from the medical team in an instant. The stern paramedic stood up and unclipped the radio from her shoulder, indicating a stand down to the incoming hospital unit. She looked down at Diane, who was still producing fake, ragged gasps. The paramedic did not offer a comforting smile. She possessed zero tolerance for individuals who diverted critical emergency resources away from actual dying patients. She pitched her voice loud enough for the police officers, the corporate sponsors, and the lingering live stream to hear every single word. The paramedic announced that the patient was experiencing a perfect, normal sinus rhythm. She stated the blood pressure was textbook and the oxygen levels were flawless. She crossed her arms and declared there was zero cardiac distress. The silence in the lobby returned heavy and suffocating. The paramedic looked directly at the Honolulu police officers. She suggested that if the woman continued to feign a medical emergency to avoid legal consequences, the authorities should consider initiating a mandatory psychiatric hold instead. She recommended an immediate hospital evaluation for severe delusion or a panic disorder. The words landed like concrete blocks on the marble floor. The fake-out failed in the most spectacular public manner possible. The medical exposure stripped away the final layers of their manufactured victimhood. The regional brand directors for the champagne company shook their heads, turned their backs, and walked out of the building. They had seen enough fraud for one morning. Diane sat up on the velvet sofa. Her miraculous rapid recovery confirmed the paramedic diagnosis. The patrolmen stepped forward, pulling out their standard-issue handcuffs. They informed Diane she was being detained for criminal trespassing and filing a false police report. Lana watched her mother get pulled to her feet. The ultimate shield had fallen. My sister looked around the rapidly emptying lobby. Her groom was gone. Her sponsors had fled. Her mother was being read her Miranda rights. The front entrance was blocked by law enforcement, and Koa guarded the main elevator bank. Lana realized the civil dispute had officially transformed into a criminal trap. Desperation is a dangerous catalyst. It forces cornered people to abandon logic and seek any available escape route. Lana locked eyes with the catering supervisor, who was angrily rolling his carts toward the service corridor. I watched her gaze track his movement toward the underground loading dock. She remembered the hidden service elevators that bypassed the main lobby security checkpoints. While the police officers were distracted handcuffing Diane, Lana slipped her smartphone into her couture gown and silently backed into the shadows of the service hallway. She prepared to launch one final physical breach of my fortress. The Honolulu police officers were occupied reading my mother her Miranda rights. The remaining corporate sponsors were busy demanding refunds from the event coordinators. No one noticed the bride slipping away into the dimly lit service corridor. Desperation strips away logic. Lana had lost her groom and her corporate funding. Her pristine public image was disintegrating in real time. She needed a scapegoat to salvage her narrative. Her objective was to bypass the secured main lobby, reach the penthouse, and stage a physical confrontation. She planned to kick my door open, cry into her smartphone camera, and accuse me of holding her hostage on her wedding day. She believed that if she could just stream a dramatic screaming match to her followers, she could twist the reality of the morning. Lana navigated the concrete labyrinth beneath the residential tower. The underground loading dock smelled of exhaust fumes and industrial bleach. It was an environment she normally avoided, treating service areas as beneath her dignity. She spotted a disgruntled catering employee sitting on a plastic crate near the delivery bays. The young man had just been fired by his supervisor for the logistical failures upstairs. He was angry and holding a universal vendor keycard. Lana approached him. She did not have cash, but she wore a diamond tennis bracelet that our mother had purchased on credit for the rehearsal dinner. Lana unclasped the jewelry and dropped it into his palm. In exchange, the fired caterer swiped his magnetic card against the restricted access panel, granting her entry to the heavy steel service elevator. The metal doors slid open. Lana stepped inside the industrial freight car. She smoothed the ruffled silk of her expensive couture gown. She checked her reflection in the polished steel wall, wiping away the smeared mascara under her eyes. She pulled her smartphone from the hidden pocket of her dress and opened her social media application. She framed the shot, preparing to go live the moment the doors parted on the 18th floor. Throughout her life, she relied on a digital audience to validate her existence. She viewed her 2 million followers as a personal army, ready to attack anyone who denied her desires. She tapped the circular button for My Floor. The elevator jolted upward, beginning its ascent through the core of the high-rise. The numbers on the digital display ticked higher. 10, 11, 12. Lana adjusted her posture, projecting an aura of righteous indignation. She rehearsed her opening lines, whispering them into the quiet cabin. She was ready to perform. But she had forgotten the structural changes I implemented 72 hours ago. The vendor keycard possessed basic building clearance, allowing access to standard utility floors. It did not possess the specific encrypted credentials required to breach the penthouse level. When I met with Koa, I did not simply change the standard locks. I activated the secondary defense matrix designed to protect the Pacific Islands Ocean Foundation data servers. I established a biometric perimeter. The freight car passed the 17th floor. The internal computer system pinged the network, requesting my authorized thermal and retinal signature to permit entry. The biometric scanner searched the cabin. It found 0 matching data points. The defense protocol categorized the moving elevator as a hostile intrusion. The trap I had laid finally sprang shut. Check-off gun fired with silent electrical precision. The elevator car jolted to a brutal, bone-rattling halt. The sudden stop threw Lana off balance, sending her crashing against the steel wall. The heavy beaded fabric of her dress tangled around her legs. The primary overhead halogen light snapped off instantly. A fraction of a second later, a sterile amber emergency light hummed to life, casting deep shadows across the small space. The heavy steel doors engaged a magnetic lock, sealing the cabin tight. The digital floor indicator flashed an error code. She was suspended in a dark concrete shaft, trapped exactly halfway between the 18th and 19th floors. Lana pushed herself up from the floor. Panic replaced her rehearsed confidence. She slammed her palm against the control panel, hitting every button in rapid succession. The console remained dark and unresponsive. She grabbed the metal handrail and kicked the heavy doors with her bare feet. The steel did not even rattle. She was entombed in an industrial cage. She picked up her smartphone, intending to resume her broadcast. She planned to cry to her fans that I had trapped her in a dark box. She stared at the screen and watched her final lifeline evaporate. The service shaft was constructed from reinforced concrete and thick steel rebar to comply with strict Hawaiian hurricane building codes. That architectural density acted as a perfect Faraday cage. It blocked all incoming and outgoing radio frequencies. There was zero cellular signal. There was zero wireless internet connection. The little broadcasting icon on her screen buffered, froze, and then terminated. The application displayed a stark offline error message. Her digital audience vanished. The millions of strangers she relied upon to validate her lies were gone. For the first time in her adult life, Lana was entirely alone, with no audience to manipulate. Sitting at my kitchen island, I tapped the smart terminal and switched the primary video feed to camera 4B. This camera monitored the interior of the service elevator. I watched the silent, amber-lit struggle play out in high definition. I saw my sister pacing like a caged animal. I watched her scream silently into the lens of the security camera, demanding release. I observed her sink to the floor, burying her face in the ruined silk tulle of her expensive gown. There was no screaming match. There was no negotiation. There was just a thief locked inside a box. The sight brought me a profound sense of closure. My sanctuary remained untainted. The extraction process was not swift. Koa monitored the situation from the ground floor security desk. He contacted the Honolulu Police Department and the local fire rescue squad. Because the cabin possessed adequate ventilation and Lana was not facing a medical emergency, the rescue personnel did not rush the operation. They prioritized active city calls before addressing a trapped trespasser. They treated the situation with the slow, methodical pace of a routine maintenance issue. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and watched the feed. 30 minutes ticked by in total silence. Eventually, the heavy scraping sound of metal tools echoed through the concrete shaft. The fire rescue crew manually cranked the thick doors open from the exterior. The bright fluorescent light of the 19th floor vestibule flooded the amber cabin. Lana squinted against the glare. She expected to see a team of paramedics ready to comfort her. Instead, she looked up and saw 2 uniformed police officers waiting with Koa. The officers stepped into the car and instructed her to stand up. They did not offer sympathy or ask about her emotional state. They ordered her to turn around and place her hands behind her back. The officers secured the steel cuffs around her wrists. The sharp, metallic click echoed in the small space. They escorted her out of the elevator and led her toward the stairwell. Her custom bridal gown was stained with grease and dirt from the industrial floor. Her carefully styled hair hung in chaotic strands around her face. The illusion of the elegant, sustainable bride was dead. The physical threat to my home was officially neutralized, but the financial devastation of the morning was far from resolved. As Lana was being marched down the fire stairs to a waiting patrol car, my lead real estate attorney walked through the revolving glass doors of the lobby. He carried a leather briefcase filled with corporate documents and foreclosure notices. The trap had secured the trespassers, but the true depth of Diane's financial ruin was about to be exposed to the remaining executives. While my sister trudged down the concrete fire stairs in handcuffs, the atmosphere inside the ground floor atrium shifted. The Honolulu patrolmen had secured the perimeter, keeping the remaining confused influencers contained near the exit. Through the revolving glass doors strode my lead real estate counsel. Mr. Caldwell possessed the sharp, unyielding posture of a man who dismantles corporate empires for a living. He wore a charcoal bespoke suit and carried a scuffed leather briefcase that held the power to destroy lives. He surveyed the ruined botanical arrangements and the sweating, stranded caterers with mild distaste. He did not rush. He navigated the chaotic foyer with surgical precision, making his way directly toward the two regional brand directors representing the luxury champagne label. The beverage executives were huddled near a marble pillar, arguing frantically into their smartphones. Caldwell interrupted their crisis management meeting by extending a thick black binder. He introduced himself as the legal representative for the Pacific Islands Ocean Foundation. The executives accepted the binder with visible hesitation. Caldwell instructed them to review the third tab containing the unredacted sponsorship agreement Lana had signed. He pointed a manicured finger at the unauthorized trademark licensing clause and the forged signature at the bottom. He explained that their company had just financed felony identity theft. He outlined the impending civil litigation they would face if a single image bearing our protected wave crest ever surfaced on their promotional channels. Watching the high-definition feed from my kitchen, I saw the blood drain from the faces of the corporate directors. They realized the depth of the liability they had absorbed. They had wired a 6-figure advance to a grifter under the false assumption they were partnering with a legitimate scientific institute. Caldwell handed them the lethal cease and desist order, freezing their ability to utilize any footage captured during the disastrous morning. The executives did not attempt to argue or defend their investment. Self-preservation kicked in. They snapped the binder shut, turned their backs on the ruined reception, and marched straight out the doors. They abandoned the bride and their financial stake, choosing to flee rather than face a public relations apocalypse. With the sponsors neutralized, Caldwell turned his attention to the velvet sofa. My mother sat detained beside a uniformed officer, holding her wrists together in a posture of exaggerated suffering. Diane had spent her entire adult life curating an illusion of upper-middle-class prosperity on the mainland. She resided in a modest suburban tract home, but furnished it like a European estate, utilizing a dangerous rotation of high-interest credit cards to fund her vanity. Whenever the debt grew too heavy, she relied on emotional manipulation to extract bailouts from extended relatives. This time, however, she had engineered a financial scheme so toxic it possessed no escape hatch. During the preparation of the restraining orders 48 hours prior, Caldwell had initiated a standard asset search to establish jurisdictional boundaries. He hired a forensic investigator to trace the funding source behind the extravagant vendor deposits. The money trail did not originate from Lana's digital marketing revenue. It traced directly back to Diane. My counsel unlatched his briefcase and extracted a bright red folder. He stood over my mother, casting a long shadow across the cushions. He pulled out a stack of bank statements and property records, laying them out on the coffee table, one by one. Caldwell spoke with a calm, resonant voice that carried across the quieted room. He laid bare the architecture of her ruin. He revealed that Diane had secretly taken out a second mortgage on her mainland house 6 months ago. She leveraged the very roof over her head to secure the cash needed to fund the non-refundable catering contracts, the imported peonies, and the $15,000 custom couture gown. She bet her entire future on the assumption that a glamorous, high-profile wedding would elevate Lana into a tier of wealth that could eventually repay the debt. But the event was dead, and the cash was already burned. The final document Caldwell placed on the glass table was a certified letter from her lending institution. Because Diane had funneled every available dollar into the Honolulu vendors, she had neglected to pay her primary mortgage for 90 days. The bank had officially initiated foreclosure proceedings. The warning notices she had hidden in a locked desk drawer back home were now sitting under the bright lights of the Hawaiian lobby. Caldwell informed her that she was bankrupt. She possessed no liquid assets, no equity, and no home to return to. The theatrical illness evaporated instantly. Diane stared at the foreclosure notice with wide, unblinking eyes. The reality of her destitution pierced the thick armor of her narcissism. She did not break down out of remorse for attempting to steal my sanctuary. She fractured out of pure, unadulterated terror. The safety net was gone. She looked around the foyer, realizing her golden child was currently sitting in the back of a police cruiser, unable to save her. Panic seized her throat. She spotted a lingering influencer who was still recording the scene from the corner of the room. Diane identified the glowing red recording light and launched into a display of staggering audacity. She lunged forward, straining against the officer grip, and shrieked directly at the camera lens. She did not apologize. She demanded a bailout. She screamed my name, demanding that I come downstairs and pay off her debt immediately. She wailed that I was the successful daughter, earning a lucrative salary to study fish, while my own family faced homelessness. She framed her financial devastation as my personal failing. She insisted it was my biological duty to write a check and erase the consequences of her fraudulent gambit. Her voice cracked, echoing off the polished stone walls, projecting a level of entitlement so profound it silenced the remaining onlookers. Sitting in the serene silence of the 18th floor, I felt a deep, satisfying calm wash over my shoulders. I did not touch the intercom button. I did not send a text message or dispatch a representative to offer a settlement. I let the silence stretch. I watched her thrash against the constraints of her own making. I did not have to speak a single word to deliver justice. Her own reckless greed, fueled by a desperate desire to exploit my success, had built the exact cage she now inhabited. The ultimate punishment was simply letting her keep the life she had chosen. The glamorous nuptials were officially dead, and the future she had envisioned was reduced to ashes. The Honolulu patrolman hauled Diane to her feet, guiding her toward the exit to join Lana in custody. The physical invasion of my building had concluded with total victory. However, the digital battlefield remained active. As the officers guided my sister into the back of a squad car, Lana managed to slip her smartphone out of her ruined bodice one last time. From the confined space of the police cruiser, she recorded a final, desperate video, pleading with her millions of fans to avenge her ruined day. She intended to unleash a swarm of online harassment to destroy my foundation reputation before she lost her cellular signal. It was time for me to execute the final digital strike. The heavy reinforced door of the Honolulu police cruiser slammed shut, trapping my sister in the back seat. The physical invasion of my Waikiki property had ended, but the digital battlefield remained highly active. Through the tinted glass of the squad car, Lana sat confined in her ruined custom couture gown. The industrial grease from the service elevator stained the delicate silk tulle. Her carefully pinned hair hung in chaotic strands around her face. The physical reality of her situation was grim, yet her instincts drove her toward the only sanctuary she had ever known. She reached into the hidden pocket of her bodice and extracted her smartphone. The arresting officers were busy up front filing initial incident reports, giving her a narrow window of opportunity. She opened her social media application and activated the camera. She did not use a filter. She weaponized her ruined appearance. She recorded a final desperate broadcast to her 2 million followers. Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the smeared mascara. She pitched her voice into a fragile, broken register. She spun a narrative of profound victimization, claiming she had been ambushed and unlawfully detained on her wedding day by a jealous older sister. She begged her digital army to avenge her ruined nuptials. She demanded they cancel my name and destroy my reputation. She hit the upload button mere seconds before a patrolman opened the rear door and confiscated the device. The video went live, broadcasting her manufactured tragedy across the globe. The notification pinged on my tablet as I sat in the quiet sanctuary of my kitchen. I watched the clip play out on the high-definition screen. I did not feel a spike of adrenaline or a sudden urge to defend myself in the comment section. Arguing with an enraged internet mob is a futile endeavor. It only validates the premise of their outrage. I prefer the surgical application of undeniable facts. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line for the crisis public relations firm retained by the Pacific Islands Ocean Foundation. The executive director answered on the first ring. We had prepared for this exact contingency. I gave him the green light to initiate the countermeasure. We did not draft an emotional rant. We did not plead for public understanding. We executed a synchronized, multi-platform digital strike. Within 10 minutes, a sterile, professional statement appeared on every major social channel. It carried the official letterhead of my legal counsel and the Ocean Foundation. The text offered zero emotional commentary. It simply presented a chronological index of evidence. The first attachment contained a high-resolution scan of the forged residential lease, highlighting the stolen utility bill headers. The second attachment displayed the unredacted corporate sponsorship agreement, exposing the fraudulent licensing of our protected marine conservation trademark. The final piece of evidence was the most devastating. We released the raw, unedited security footage from the ground floor lobby. The video files included crystal clear ambient audio captured by the hidden microphones near the concierge desk. The internet watched the polished, elegant sustainability bride morph into a shrieking trespasser. They viewed the high-angle shot of Lana thrusting her phone into Koa face, demanding access to a $12 million penthouse she did not own. They heard the cold, undeniable authority of the security professional presenting the formal trespass warning. The raw audio captured every shrill demand and every entitled threat she hurled at the working-class staff. The footage then transitioned to the arrival of the groom. Millions of viewers witnessed the exact moment Trent realized his entire relationship was constructed on a foundation of felony fraud. The security cameras offered an unflinching view of his realization. The audience watched him step away from his weeping bride. They saw the profound disgust radiating from his posture. The digital world watched him unpin the rare blue orchid from his ivory lapel, drop it onto the cold marble floor, and walk out the revolving doors without looking back. The final video clip documented the medical fake-out. The internet watched Diane collapse onto the velvet sofa, clutching her chest in a theatrical display of cardiac arrest. They saw Lana instantly pivot to monetize her mother's suffering for the camera. Then the paramedics arrived. The stern voice of the emergency responder echoed across millions of smartphone speakers, declaring a perfect, normal sinus rhythm. The paramedic brutal recommendation for a mandatory psychiatric hold served as the ultimate punchline to their manufactured drama. The digital tide turned with breathtaking speed. The parasocial bond Lana had cultivated with her audience shattered upon impact with the concrete truth. The followers who had praised her resilience just 10 minutes prior now experienced the sharp whiplash of betrayal. Nobody likes realizing they have been manipulated by a grifter. The comment section beneath her tearful police car video transformed into a ruthless tribunal. Sympathy evaporated. Mockery replaced devotion. Users began cross-referencing her previous posts, identifying the subtle lies and the staged environments. Memes generated from the security footage proliferated across the network. Images of the wilted orchids baking in the lobby and the dropped boutonniere lying on the marble floor became viral symbols of her failed deception. The digital army she had weaponized turned its artillery directly onto her curated empire. The rapid shift in public sentiment triggered an immediate corporate reaction. Brand managers utilizing sentiment analysis software detected the catastrophic trend. The remaining sponsors acted with ruthless efficiency to sever their ties. They recognized that the toxicity of her brand was now a direct threat to their own consumer trust. Within an hour, official statements flooded the internet. Clothing labels, cosmetics companies, and travel agencies publicly dropped her from their influencer rosters. They posted their own press releases, condemning her actions and distancing their products from the fraud. The financial scaffolding supporting her lavish lifestyle evaporated in the span of 60 minutes. The automated deposit streams halted. The affiliate links died. Her online empire crumbled into digital dust before the Honolulu police cruiser even reached the downtown precinct parking lot. When the patrolman escorted her out of the vehicle for booking, she possessed nothing. The audience was gone, the income was gone, the groom was gone. I sat on my lanai listening to the rhythmic crash of the waves against the Waikiki shoreline. The silence in the penthouse felt profound and absolute. The parasitic threat was neutralized. However, the digital execution left a significant vacuum in its wake. The corporate entities drawn into the disaster were now scrambling for a lifeline. The regional directors for the luxury champagne brand were staring down a massive public relations nightmare. They had wired a six-figure advance to a felon, and their logo was now inextricably linked to a viral humiliation. They needed a way to salvage their reputation and wash away the stench of the fraudulent wedding. They were desperate for a clean exit strategy. I held the only available life preserver, and I intended to name my price. The regional brand directors for the luxury champagne label retreated to a private boardroom in a downtown Honolulu hotel. Their smartphones buzzed relentlessly with urgent emails from their global headquarters. The viral security footage dominated the digital news cycle. Their premium product was now inextricably linked to felony forgery and an unhinged influencer meltdown. A luxury brand relies entirely on an aura of exclusivity and refinement. That curated image was evaporating. The directors drafted statements and contacted their own legal counsel, preparing to sue my sister for breach of contract. They possessed a penalty clause allowing them to seize her remaining assets to recoup their squandered advance. However, civil litigation is a slow, grueling process. A lawsuit would generate months of tabloid headlines, ensuring their logo remained attached to her toxic name. They required an immediate exit strategy to stem the bleeding. Sitting in my quiet office, I recognized their vulnerability. In marine biology, when a predator is wounded, it becomes desperate and predictable. The beverage executives were bleeding public goodwill. I called my lead real estate attorney, Caldwell, and the foundation corporate counsel. I outlined a strategy of forensic retaliation. I did not want to drag the champagne company into a protracted legal battle over trademark infringement. A trial would consume years of my time and drain resources from our coral restoration projects. Instead, I proposed a settlement that weaponized their desperation. Caldwell arranged a secure video conference with the beverage representatives and their legal team. I sat off camera, listening to the audio feed. The champagne directors appeared visibly exhausted on the screen. Their crisp linen suits looked rumpled. Caldwell controlled the pace of the negotiation. He did not issue threats. He spoke with the soothing rhythm of a negotiator offering a life raft to drowning men. He acknowledged their predicament. He noted that their failure to conduct basic due diligence on a forged commercial lease exposed them to severe trademark liability. The corporate officers stiffened, preparing for a crushing financial demand. Caldwell presented the terms of my settlement. We would decline to pursue federal trademark infringement charges against their parent company. In exchange, they would execute a specific financial maneuver. The sponsorship contract Lana signed included a punitive damages clause for brand defamation. Caldwell instructed the executives to activate that specific clause immediately. They would legally extract $150,000 from her frozen banking accounts. But the money would not return to their corporate treasury. Caldwell demanded they redirect every single penny of that penalty directly to the Pacific Islands Ocean Foundation. The transaction would be categorized as a tax-deductible charitable donation. My attorney explained the psychological brilliance of the maneuver. If they sued Lana, they looked like foolish victims of a cheap internet scam. If they donated the penalty funds to a respected scientific institute, they transformed into corporate heroes. We offered to draft a joint press release. The statement would declare that the champagne label had discovered the fraud, severed ties with the deceptive influencer, and chosen to honor their commitment to environmental sustainability by funding authentic marine conservation. The executives stared at the screen, processing the lifeline. They were being offered a golden parachute woven from my sister's financial ruin. The Champagne legal team muted their microphones for exactly 3 minutes. When the audio re-engaged, the lead director nodded. They accepted the terms without requesting a single revision. The legal machinery moved with terrifying speed. Because Lana had signed a binding arbitration agreement, the corporate lawyers filed the breach of contract penalty with a local judge. My sister's bank accounts were already frozen due to the pending criminal charges, making her assets sitting targets. A court order authorized the immediate seizure of the designated funds. The bank initiated the wire transfer, pulling the last remaining traces of her digital wealth into a corporate escrow account. From there, the money flowed directly into the operational budget of my scientific foundation. The transaction cleared my banking portal late that afternoon. I sat at my kitchen island, tracing the digital ledger. The sheer poetry of the resolution provided a profound sense of satisfaction. Throughout her life, Lana had treated my career as a tedious joke. She mocked my dedication to the ocean, viewing my environmental work as a waste of time compared to the pursuit of internet fame. She tried to steal my $12 million sanctuary to manufacture a fake, glamorous reality. Instead, her greed funded the exact scientific research she despised. Her stolen corporate advance was now legally earmarked to purchase specialized thermal monitoring equipment for a remote coral nursery. The influencer circus paid for authentic ecological preservation. The joint press release hit the wire services the following morning. The media devoured the narrative. The champagne brand received widespread praise for their decisive ethical action. Their consumer trust metrics rebounded, stabilizing their stock price. The public narrative shifted, portraying them as champions of the environment who refused to tolerate influencer deception. They salvaged their prestige by aligning with the very credibility my sister tried to steal. Meanwhile, Lana sat in a holding cell reading the news through a pane of reinforced glass. Her defense attorney had to explain that her accounts were drained to zero. She possessed no funds to post bail or hire a premium legal defense team. The financial parasitism that defined our family dynamic was reversed. I did not just stop her from extracting my resources. I engineered a scenario where her deception actively financed my legacy. Diane faced a similar reality back on the mainland. The foreclosure on her modest suburban home advanced without any possibility of a bailout. She moved her belongings into a cheap rental apartment, utilizing the last fraction of her credit. The community of wealthy friends she had cultivated abandoned her the moment the viral videos exposed her fake medical emergency. Her carefully constructed facade of prosperity collapsed, leaving her isolated and broke. She attempted to call me twice from an unknown number. I did not answer. The boundary I established remained impenetrable. The retaliation was clean, clinical, and permanent. I had severed the toxic bloodline without engaging in a single screaming match. The biometric locks on my Penthouse doors remained secure. The Hawaiian breeze continued to flow across my quiet lanai. The vendors were gone. The trespassers were locked away. The corporate entities were neutralized. The trap had functioned flawlessly on every level, providing a masterstroke of forensic justice. However, the justice system still required its formal conclusion. The civil maneuvers were complete, but the criminal charges remained active. The state of Hawaii treats property theft and wire fraud with severe consequences. The physical invasion of my Waikiki property demanded a final verdict in a court of law. Lana could not cry her way out of a felony indictment. I closed my laptop and poured a glass of chilled water. The storm had passed, leaving a crystal-clear horizon in its wake. All that remained was the formal sentencing and the ultimate restoration of my peace. 6 months later, the dust had permanently settled over the island of Oahu. The final chapter of the conflict did not take place in a luxurious residential lobby or on a digital social media platform. It concluded inside a sterile Honolulu district courtroom. The State Judicial Building is a brutalist concrete structure devoid of charm or tropical warmth. The fluorescent lighting overhead offered no flattering angles and cast harsh shadows across the defendant table. Lana stood before a weary circuit judge wearing a generic gray blazer purchased from a discount rack. Her posture lacked the arrogant defiance she once carried. She looked small and entirely ordinary. Because the corporate sponsors had successfully redirected their penalty funds to the Ocean Foundation, the state prosecutor focused solely on the criminal statutes of forgery and trespassing. The evidence compiled in our digital strike left her public defender with zero leverage. Facing the terrifying prospect of a federal prison sentence for manufacturing fraudulent lease documents, Lana accepted a harsh plea agreement. She stood in front of the microphone and quietly entered a plea of guilty to multiple felony charges. The judge handed down a sentence designed to deliver pure, poetic justice. Lana avoided a jail cell, but she forfeited her freedom in a far more visible manner. She was sentenced to 500 hours of manual community service under the direct supervision of the State Department of Public Works. She was stripped of her digital identity and handed a high-visibility orange safety vest. Every Saturday and Sunday morning, while the tourists sleep off their tropical cocktails, my sister reports to a municipal maintenance shed. She is issued a plastic bucket, thick rubber gloves, and a metal trash grabber. She spends her weekends walking the shoreline of the exact Waikiki beaches she once tried to exploit. In her previous life, she viewed the Hawaiian coast merely as a filtered aesthetic backdrop for her brand. She used digital software to blur out the tourists and erase any imperfections from the sand. Now she is forced to confront the physical reality of the environment she commodified. She picks up discarded plastic cups, cigarette butts, and fast food wrappers. The tropical sun beats down on her shoulders without the forgiving glow of a professional ring light. The humidity ruins her hair, and the manual labor leaves blisters on her palms. Occasionally, a group of teenagers will recognize her from the viral security footage. They point their smartphones at her, capturing raw, unflinching images of the disgraced influencer hauling garbage bags across the sand. She cannot delete their comments or block their profiles. She is forced to endure the reality of the physical world she spent a decade trying to escape. Thousands of miles away on the mainland, Diane faced her own bleak reckoning. The foreclosure on her suburban home proceeded with ruthless banking efficiency. The lending institution seized the property and auctioned her curated furniture to cover the outstanding margins of her second mortgage. Stripped of her assets and her credit, she was forced to relocate to a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a beige concrete complex. Her new reality is defined by thin drywall and synthetic carpet. She no longer hosts lavish dinner parties or boasts about her golden child to the neighborhood elite. The country club friends she spent years cultivating stopped returning her phone calls the moment the paramedical fake-out went viral. They vanished the instant her facade of prosperity shattered. Diane sits alone in her cramped living room, listening to the heavy footsteps of the neighbors in the unit above her. She possesses no leverage, no funds, and no targets left to manipulate. The financial ruin she engineered to exploit my success became her permanent cage. Her isolation is profound and entirely self-inflicted. Trent navigated the fallout of the canceled wedding with remarkable grace. The architect returned to his firm and threw himself into his work. The betrayal he experienced in my lobby acted as a brutal but necessary catalyst for clarity. He deleted his social media profiles, stepping away from the superficial ecosystem that nearly ruined his life. He now designs residential spaces that emphasize transparency, utilizing raw timber, exposed steel, and floor-to-ceiling glass. He builds structures that possess nothing to hide. He is currently dating a woman who works in urban landscape design. She cultivates authentic gardens and values tangible reality over digital metrics. Trent is thriving, having severed his ties to the illusion forever. As for me, my life returned to the quiet, predictable rhythm of the tides. On a warm Tuesday evening, I left the Pacific Islands Ocean Foundation after securing a new federal grant for a deep-water coral nursery. I drove my car along the coastal highway, watching the sun begin its slow descent toward the horizon. I pulled into the circular driveway of my residential tower. The property looked immaculate. I walked through the revolving glass doors and crossed the serene marble foyer. Koa stood behind the polished mahogany security desk. We exchanged a brief, silent nod of mutual respect. He understood the architecture of a secure perimeter, and I understood the value of the men who enforce it. I stepped into my private elevator and scanned my retina on the biometric reader. The heavy steel doors slid shut, and the car ascended smoothly to the 18th floor. The doors opened directly into my $12 million sanctuary. The acoustic paneling absorbed the faint mechanical hum of the elevator, leaving a pristine, unbroken silence. The air smelled faintly of cedar and sea salt. The space was secure, uncompromised, and entirely mine. I walked past the high-definition security terminals, which displayed nothing but empty hallways and quiet perimeters. The threat was eradicated, and the fortress remained impenetrable. I walked into the kitchen and opened the stainless steel refrigerator. Sitting on the top shelf was a single chilled bottle of premium vintage brut. It was the exact luxury champagne brand that had sponsored the fraudulent wedding. During the panicked retreat of the vendors, the beverage executives had abandoned a promotional display cart in the lobby. Koa had logged the inventory into the building evidence locker. After the Honolulu police cleared the scene and closed the active investigation, Koa returned the unopened bottle to my residence. It felt like a fitting trophy from a war won through patience and paperwork. I peeled away the gold foil and untwisted the wire cage. I gripped the cork and twisted the heavy green glass. The cork released with a sharp, echoing pop that resonated through the quiet kitchen. A faint wisp of white vapor curled from the neck of the bottle. I retrieved a crystal flute from the overhead cabinet and poured the pale golden liquid. The tiny bubbles rushed to the surface, sparkling under the recessed lighting. I carried the glass out through the sliding doors onto the wide lanai. The Hawaiian sunset was reaching its peak. The sky ignited in brilliant, spectacular hues of deep violet, burning gold, and soft crimson. The colors reflected off the vast expanse of the ocean, stretching out toward the edge of the world. The gentle trade winds carried the rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the distant reef. I stood at the glass railing looking down at the pristine coastline. The toxic elements of my past were gone, swept away by a current they could neither understand nor control. I raised the crystal flute toward the horizon, catching the last rays of the dying sun. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the cold champagne. It tasted like victory. I lowered the glass and stood in the fading light, savoring the quiet, impenetrable peace of the Pacific Ocean. I spent years mapping the slow, silent decay of coral reefs, measuring the devastating impact of toxic runoff on fragile ecosystems. Yet nothing in my scientific career prepared me for the sudden, catastrophic collapse of my own family's ecosystem. The events that unfolded in the pristine marble lobby of my Waikiki penthouse, the forged leases, the shattered corporate sponsorships, the arrival of handcuffs on a wedding day, were not a spontaneous tragedy. They were the inevitable, violent harvest of a seed planted decades ago in the quiet suburbs of the mainland. We often look at an entitled adult, a person willing to commit felony fraud, exploit loved ones, and lie to the world, and wonder where they lost their way. But the uncomfortable truth of modern American parenting is that children rarely lose their way entirely on their own. They are carefully, methodically guided there by the very hands meant to protect them. In the traditional American family structure, there is a profound, almost religious emphasis on providing a better life for the next generation. We celebrate the sacrifices parents make, measuring their devotion by the opportunities they afford their children. However, within this hyper-competitive culture of achievement, there is a dangerous, unseen line where providing turns into shielding, and sacrifice mutates into toxic enabling. My mother, Diane, believed she was practicing profound unconditional love. Whenever my younger sister, Lana, faced a hurdle, a disappointment, or a natural consequence, Diane rushed in to dismantle it with breathless urgency. When a bad grade was earned, the educational system was blamed. When a teenage mistake was made, a check was written to erase the evidence. Diane viewed Lana's beauty and charm as delicate assets that needed to be insulated from the abrasive friction of the real world. She bought into the uniquely American illusion that a child's self-esteem must be protected at all costs, even at the expense of their character. However, a child shielded from the friction of reality never develops the calluses necessary to survive it. We are taught that a parent's primary responsibility is to ensure their child's happiness. I argue that this is the most destructive myth in modern child rearing. A parent's fundamental responsibility is to make their child capable. By aggressively clearing every obstacle from Lana's path, Diane robbed her of the vital opportunity to develop a moral compass. In its place, she installed a compass that only pointed toward immediate, selfish gratification. The foundation of any healthy, enduring family must be rooted in unshakable fairness and brutal honesty. When these pillars are compromised to maintain a facade of peace, the structural integrity of the home rots from the inside out. I learned the value of a dollar, the heavy weight of a kept promise, and the absolute necessity of personal integrity because I was forced to navigate the world without a safety net. I was the child whose hard-earned science scholarship was quietly drained to fund a crystal-beaded pageant gown. In Diane's distorted mind, she was simply reallocating family resources to the child who needed the spotlight the most to succeed. But this gross inequity taught us both a devastating lifelong lesson. It taught me that my sanctuary would only ever be built by my own two hands, forged in isolation. Far more tragically, it taught Lana that other people's achievements, their boundaries, and their very homes were merely raw materials intended for her own vanity. When a traditional family prioritizes aesthetic success over ethical grounding, it raises adults who cannot distinguish between tangible reality and a curated social media feed. They become ghosts haunting their own lives, desperate for an audience to validate the empty shell of their existence. They learn to view relationships not as bonds of mutual respect, but as transactional opportunities. True emotional awareness in child-rearing is not simply asking a child how they feel and validating every impulse. It is the difficult work of teaching them how to process discomfort without weaponizing it against the people around them. Lana learned very early that tears were a currency that could purchase absolute compliance. Diane never taught her to sit with failure to process rejection or to accept the word no with grace. Instead, she taught her how to perform distress to manipulate her environment. The meltdown in the lobby, the fake cardiac arrest on the velvet sofa, the forged corporate contracts, these were not the calculated actions of a criminal mastermind. They were the frantic, desperate maneuvers of a spoiled child trapped in an adult's body, utilizing the only survival tools her mother had ever bothered to give her. It is a terrifying realization that the deepest cruelty a parent can inflict on a child is to convince them that the rules of society do not apply to them. By shielding Lana from minor consequences in her youth, Diane guaranteed that her daughter would eventually face catastrophic consequences in adulthood. We often hesitate to hold our family members accountable because we fear breaking the sacred bond of blood. We are conditioned to endure abuse in the name of familial loyalty. But a bond built on exploitation is not a family. It is a hostage situation. If you have ever had to sever a toxic tie to preserve your own sanity, or if you firmly believe that true love requires the courage to enforce ironclad boundaries, you are not alone in this fight. Follow Great Becco Stories for more stories of ordinary people who refuse to be collateral damage, who stop apologizing for their hard-earned success, and who start demanding the respect they deserve. We share these narratives because standing up to the people who share our DNA is often the hardest, yet most profoundly necessary battle we will ever fight. Conventional wisdom dictates that family is unconditional, that a mother's love is an impenetrable protective shield, and that we must always forgive those who sit at our Thanksgiving tables. But what if unconditional love is actually a profound disservice? What if the highest, most pure form of love is entirely conditional? Conditional upon honesty, mutual respect, and unyielding integrity. Diane loved Lana unconditionally, and that smothering unconditional love led her golden child straight into the back of a police cruiser and reduced her own life to a foreclosed suburban memory. The ultimate failure was not Lana's fraudulent wedding or her stolen sponsorships. The ultimate failure was a mother who loved her daughter's reflection more than she loved her daughter's character. We look at the shattered ruins of families like mine and shake our heads, whispering quiet thanks that it isn't us. But every time we excuse a lie to keep the peace, every time we shield a child from a deserved failure, and every time we prioritize a comfortable illusion over a hard truth, we are quietly laying the bricks of that exact same prison. I stand on my lanai watching the Pacific tide effortlessly erase the footprints on the shore, and I am left with a chilling, quiet certainty. The most dangerous predators in our lives rarely break through our windows in the dead of night. We invite them in, pack their lunches, and call them family.